Hi everybody, I'm Tim.
I'm Steph.
And we're going to be continuing with the AI theme, and the topic that we're going to be discussing today is how we're seeing generative AI impacting user interface design and user experience design with the clients that we're working with, and also the R&D that we're doing within our business, time and attention. And we really do see this as a positive feature, positive future. So this is going to be full of positivity, and we're really excited about the new things and the new capabilities that designers can put into place and use in the future and now with some of the generative AI tools and techniques and modes that are some are here and now and some are coming soon. So very briefly, time and attention, we are Australia's first generative AI experience agency. We work with clients like NBC Universal and Foxtel and Asahi to help them understand and get excited and hopefully blow their minds about generative AI, help them work out how this applies to them and in their business, and then also get started with it and building custom user experiences and apps and products to bring custom solutions to their business.
So in preparation for this presentation, we had a bit of a discussion about what was our thesis around how interfaces, interactions are going to be changing over time, mediated and delivered by AI technology. We find ourselves kind of drinking from the fire hose. There's so much change, so much innovation, so many releases of new products, tools and approaches coming out all the time, that it's really difficult to kind of wrap your head around where this thing might go. And we thought it was really important to begin our kind of conversation today around one of these kind of potential futures that we can see AI delivering for us. So we started with where we are right now, which is the kind of the user faces that are slightly personalised, that are drawing on data and technology to give people some sort of individualised interface that comes through. I mean, the screenshot here is from Nielsen Norman Group, who put out a great article a few weeks ago about generative user interfaces and this idea of getting to the individualised interface that could be dynamically served up based on context. But one of the challenges we have around that kind of way of thinking about individual brands kind of delivering a unique interface is just the limitations of context that you have around what the user wants from you. Anybody who's seen any kind of targeted advertising knows that these people are chasing you around the internet for weeks after you've already taken the action that you wanted to do when you were originally looking for their products. So we see that that's this kind of the past paradigm where interfaces will slightly dynamically adjust to data that's known about you. There's this huge exciting possibility for us right now, which is this explosion of interfaces, touch points, and interaction models that we can see that AI is starting to deliver for us. And that's coming through from all of these new touch points and channels that AI is starting to kind of emerge in. For designers, we think this is a really important thing to have some consistency around the way that these things are being stitched together with AI. And so design systems become super important right now to make sure that you're maintaining consistency in terms of presentation of information, tone of voice, content across all of these proliferating channels. And then we were talking about what's happening in the future, and it was touched on Michael's presentation just before, but we're getting into a world where AI starts to act on our behalf and starts to think about what we would act as an intermediary between us and the organisations that we're engaging with. And anybody who's seen the movie Her starts to know what this might look like. It's a personal agent in your pocket. It's a bit of a science fiction future, but it's becoming closer all the time, where we'll end up having AI agents who have enough context about us with our personal preferences, our interactions, our transactions, and our histories to be able to make recommendations, to be able to negotiate on our behalf. And so we see that as a bit of a convergence of UIs ultimately, where suddenly we start to see AIs acting as agents for us in our mediation with the world. This was captured really well in the recent keynotes from Microsoft. So when Microsoft were talking about where they're taking AI technologies as part of their Build conference, they had this great idea of the way they're separating out the kind of layers of AI. They have the universal interface, which for many of us who've been playing around with the kind of chat tools available, you've seen the way that these tools are translating your natural language into intent, and then from the intents delivering actions. They've talked about the kind of memory and context layer, and this is how they kind of build up a view of what it is that you really mean when you're asking questions of the AIs. And there's really only a handful of providers who can kind of have enough of that universal view of you to build up that kind of context and memory. And then there's the reasoning and planning side of things, which is the underlying kind of foundation models, the technology that powers the outcomes of these sorts of things. And so we've got this bit of a thesis that we're all kind of exploding in terms of interfaces driven by AI right now, but there will be a convergence in the future, and the role of designers and brands in that kind of explosion and then convergence is a really interesting thing for us designers to think about.
Thanks, Steph. And another way of putting that, and this is something Michael was discussing in that last presentation, which I really enjoyed, is multimodality. And that term, people might be starting to hear that used in some of those millions of YouTube videos and Apple keynotes, and certainly OpenAI are using this term a lot. So multimodal is a large language model that can see and it can hear and it can talk, and that's all crammed into one model. Whereas sort of maybe as early as 2 or 3 weeks ago, prior to GPT-4o being released, all of those models were separate. So you could do one thing at a time. You could talk, or you could listen, or you could chat with text. So I'm going to give a few examples of those different modes in action and different types of new products that you can build using generative AI tools, but starting out with one mode or one modality at a time. The first one here is text chat, and everybody is familiar with ChatGPT. Some people here might have also tried Pi, which is, it's not really an alternative to ChatGPT. It works quite differently, but it is a text-based model, and the difference is it has personality and emotion in it. It wants to be your friend, it wants to be your psychologist, it wants to help you, in this case, prepare for a conference if you're nervous about public speaking, and it will really coach you along and be your personal AI buddy. So very different tone of voice to ChatGPT, but it's something that you can use for a different purpose. But again, it's text-based. An example of that being put into practice by brands and by people, designers in the room with either the companies that you work for, or maybe if you're an agency, the clients of yours, this is something that we built for a luxury appliance manufacturer. And it's applying that same kind of modality, the text and large language model, kind of like ChatGPT, but putting it in the context of a store environment. And a problem that this appliance manufacturer had is on a busy weekend day, you go into Harvey Norman and you can't get someone to help you and tell you all the features of that oven that you're looking at. And putting that into the hands of the user and making that self-service. But then the problem is creating all that content takes a huge amount of effort. They actually already have this content in PDF files, like they have a PDF brochure and they have a manufacturer's warranty and they have the user manual. So we built the tool where you just drop all those PDFs and you can then ask, so behind the scenes, the client just drops all the PDFs into a folder and then the users can just ask any question. So it's like a ChatGPT for that appliance. So it's an example of using the same technology behind Pi or ChatGPT, but applying it in a different way for a brand. A different modality, and this is really super interesting and coming about in full steam, is wearables, and wearables powered by AI. So people here probably have seen the Meta, or maybe not in person, but heard of the Meta glasses, Meta Ray-Ban collaboration. These have a camera in them and they have a microphone in them, and they can see and hear the world, and they have a brain. They have a large language model brain that is interpreting the scene, which if you're up here right now, it's just massive bright lights, so it would probably freak out. Think I'd gone to heaven, maybe. But it can, if I'm looking at Steph, it would not tell me who Steph is, because it doesn't like doing faces and things like that, but it would tell me the T-shirt that he's wearing and things like that, and describe the world around me in audio. So you can see how it's bringing some of those modalities together, the brain, the language model, the vision, and also the audio. On the right-hand side is the Humane AI pin, which was released maybe 2 months ago, maybe, yeah. And to great fanfare. So a lot of people here might have heard about this. It was founded by some Apple engineers, and they had basically a boatload of money, and they were designing this new device which sits on your lapel, and it can see, kind of like the glasses, it can see the world, has a language model brain, so it can understand, it can do translations, it does audio, voice in, voice out, and it has this very new, interesting interface paradigm, which is a laser LED that broadcasts or sort of points the interface onto your hand, and then you control it with your fingers, which I haven't tried, and people are not big fans of this. It has got not very good reviews, but it's an interesting peek into the future, again, of these language models plus new devices and different modalities being used in different and interesting ways. And I'm going to let this video play. Hopefully the video will play. And this is an example of that being put into an accessibility context.
Yes, it looks like the king is in residence right now. The royal standard flag is flying above Buckingham Palace, which is the signal that the monarch is present. How exciting to be there while the king is home.
Try and tell me exactly what they're doing right now, please.
Right now the ducks are gently gliding across the water. They're moving in a fairly relaxed manner, not in a hurry. Occasionally, one of them will dip its head under the water, probably looking for food, and then pop back up.
I even know when a taxi is coming with its orange light on. I think I'll hail it to get home.
Yes.
So we get the idea. If we can
spotted
maybe
one
just
just
turn the
now.
audio down on that,
It's
please.
heading away on the left side of the road.
Thank you. So again, another example of bringing those different modalities together, but in a super interesting way. So in this case, being the eyes of somebody who is blind and helping them out with the navigation of the real world, and ducks. There's also a really interesting new design paradigm called spatial UI, and everybody here who's a designer will know about the Apple Vision Pro. I saw my first pair on Monday in an event that we ran, which was pretty cool. And as well as being a new design and user interface paradigm, it creates an issue with creation of content. Like, how do you create the 3D objects to make these scenes immersive? And that's something that's happening, like it's really pretty cutting edge, but with generative AI, everyone knows in ChatGPT, you can type some words in and create an image using DALL-E 3. But NVIDIA and Roblox and companies like this are doing the same thing with 3D models. So they, I don't think, work kind of quite well just yet. But pretty soon, you can just type in a prompt and say, I want a couch, a white couch that looks like this, and describe it, maybe upload a still image of the couch, and it will create a 3D model, which can then be used in a spatial environment or in a game. And you just do that from a prompt. I know that robots can be scary, so I'm going to try and keep on the positive side of robots. And this is something that is super interesting and happening really rapidly, is not just the hardware of the robots, so robots becoming really good physically, but we have the brains we've been talking about, the brains, the language model that powers ChatGPT or Pi. These brains have been put into the robots, and hopefully this is going to work out well for all of us. I'm reading a book called I, Robot, which is written by Isaac Asimov. It's published in 1950, so it's a more than 70-year-old book. And it's really interesting. It's a collection of short stories about robots and humans in the future, and actually the future then was about 10 or 20 years ago. The robots are described as they look like this, but the stories are these parables of, they're not really, I'm only 2 stories into the book, so far they're not like disaster stories like robots taking over the world, but they're unintended consequences of living with robots. And the conversation Steph and I were having before is, these are all like design problems. What they're describing is somebody has not done a great job designing how the robots interact with humans in the real world. And so there's some work for designers, whether it's robot toasters or real robots in the future, will be pretty exciting.
So what we wanted to do now is kind of take it into some of the ways that we're seeing people starting to design with AI. So some of the tools that are being used to create new interfaces, new interactions, new dynamic patterns in design, and some of those tools that are emerging at the moment, which could kind of hint at where the design practice is going to go. One of the things that we're seeing at the moment that AI is powering, as Tim mentioned, is just the capabilities of producing enormous amounts of content at very fast pace and at low cost, which is a real paradigm changer in the way that people deal with brands in the digital world. One of the things that has been a real issue for designers for a long time with that is that this concept of hallucinations or the concept of consistency in AI output has been a real challenge since these sorts of models were released. But we're starting to see those challenges being overcome. So there's lots of organisations starting to create tools and processes, establish guardrails, establish things like being able to train on previous images. We've done a lot of work with brands around their marketing approaches, for example, using tone of voice, using brand guidelines, using brand imagery to help train and fine-tune the sorts of models and the outputs. So the example here is a company called EverArt. They've got a kind of fine-tuned image production AI model, and it allows you to create variations on a theme, but within tight guardrails, within kind of brand guidelines or within image guidelines. And it means that you're not going through that repetitive nature of, trying to prompt for the exact thing you're after. You can actually get these models to start to be a bit more on brand, a bit more pragmatic and useful in a design context. Still creating enormous amounts of content that can be used for things like personalisation or can be used for things for like segment targeting. Other examples about kind of pragmatic and practical uses. So this is an example for some work we've done for a furniture retailer. They have a lot of excess stock that hasn't been kind of professionally photographed or return stock that they're trying to sell in other contexts. Where they haven't got access to a studio, they don't have access to a professional photographer. They can't style and create all of the imagery required around every single item that they have in their catalogues. We've been able to take these images. These are taken in warehouses, they're taken in factories, they're done, as you can see, in situations that aren't ideal for putting out into marketing material or online. And using AI techniques, you're able to kind of in-paint them into AI-generated environments. And this kind of potential for applications of the technology, it's happening very quickly and it's happening at very high quality. Your ability to kind of look at things like the lighting sourcing, the shadowing of the infill here. It's starting to look like you're mixing real world and AI-generated imagery in a way that's really quite compelling. One thing that we would recommend anybody working with chat models to kind of provide inputs into their workflow is to think about yourself as a director and think about the chat model as like an improv actor. So when you're starting to talk to chat models, there is no script that the AI will respond with. You can't kind of hard script these things. They are predictive in nature and they will create creative responses, but you can set up the environment, you can set up the stage, you can apply a persona, you can give it a whole lot of reference material in terms of tone of voice, and you can ask it to play a role. And so this example here is like when you go to ChatGPT and you ask it to provide a design review of work you've done, you can tune it so that it's actually approaching that as a design critique. And in this case, we were looking at it from accessibility guidelines and asking the LLM to provide a bit of critique on whether the designs that were uploaded meet accessibility guidelines and what are some of the issues. And it's actually able to give you quite a detailed review of that sort of stuff. But you can tune those personas or the roles that you ask the AI to play to be very different. So you can have creative roles, you can have critique roles, you can have compliance roles. And the LLMs are actually very highly tunable, so you can get them to kind of take on those roles very effectively. Something else that we're seeing coming through pretty rapidly in the kind of design world is this idea of going from text prompt to product layout or design to product templating to code generation. There's a number of new startups. This particular example is a company called Reloom. They're an Australian business. They have a technique of going from prompting to generating sitemaps, and you can use AI prompts to talk about the pages within a site or a project or a product. You can use it to talk about the features within each individual page, and it'll create a wireframe generation off the back of a sitemap. It's built into component-based libraries, so it has a web form library, it has React libraries, it exports into Figma, and so in some of the playing around we've done with it, the ability to go from a prompt around what a product could be to generate sitemaps and wireframes and then export them into a production-ready environment like Figma with componentry in a design system could reduce the time it takes to get prototype products to market enormously. And then there's a question about how this all comes to life in terms of personalised delivery. One of the examples that we saw, which kind of had a lot of conversation in our team, was this example from KLM. So KLM have come up with this way of trying to provide travel inspiration. Obviously, it's one of the kind of most emotive products out there. People are always planning travel trips and trying to find out things to do at destination. KLM have built in a AI-driven model which is drawing in a whole lot of information about destinations, matching it to your kind of preferred mode of travel. So, is it with family? Is it to see history? Is it to be active? Filtering those kind of recommendations down into a dynamically generated itinerary or recommendation, and then feeding that back in a kind of a one-to-one model. And we had some debate about how much of this is live and, passed through the AI directly to customers and how much of it is kind of canned content. Most people aren't kind of letting these AIs loose on generating content and providing it directly to customers, for kind of risk purposes or compliance purposes. So there is this kind of concept that a lot of this might be pre-produced and canned and ready to serve based on parameters that are fed in. But at the same time, this content there's so many variations of this content that to do that in a human workflow with traditional kind of content strategy and production would have been extremely onerous. So many kind of variations of content and stitching it together, time of year, place, activity. It would have been an enormous content task, which the AIs make considerably simpler.
Back at the very beginning of this presentation, Steph was talking about the atomization of user experience design and UI. So bringing it back to that, and excuse me, Steph was talking about that being in the future, and now sort of bringing that into, well, actually the future is definitely closer than we might think. And we started preparing for this presentation maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and since then about 5 things have changed, and we've had to change this all the time. Actually, when you have to provide your presentation a week in advance, it makes it really hard to do an AI presentation, so thank you, Grant. But something that did come out last week, which was very relevant to us and to this atomization, was Apple's release. And Michael talked about Apple Intelligence. What he didn't show was the new Siri, well, the soon-to-be the future Siri, which we don't know when this new Siri will be around and available for us, but probably 2024. And it's really a good preview into this atomization and taking some of those things that we see in her and having those in our pockets in maybe within 6 months. So I'm going to play this video for a second. It lasts for 1 minute.
Imagine that I'm planning to pick my mom up from the airport, and I'm trying to figure out my timing. Siri is going to be able to help me do this so easily. Siri, when is my mom's flight landing? What's awesome is that Siri actually cross-references flight details that my mom shared with me by email with real-time flight tracking to give me her up-to-date arrival time. What's our lunch plan? I don't always remember to add things to my calendar, and so I love that Siri can help me keep track of plans that I've made in casual conversation, like this lunch reservation my mom mentioned in a text. How long will it take us to get there from the airport? I haven't had to jump from mail to messages to maps to figure out this plan. And a set of tasks that would have taken minutes on my own, and honestly probably would have resulted in a call to my mom, could be addressed in a matter of seconds. That's just a glimpse of the ways in which Siri is going to become more powerful and more personal thanks to Apple Intelligence.
So what we can see there is the atomization of the UI of a number of apps that are on the lady's phone. So she's got content from an email, she's got a travel booking, she's got her calendar, and right now those things are all different apps that us as designers would design separately. But in the future, those are all going to be feeding into, in this case, Siri, our assistant, and providing the information that we as a customer want or we as a user want whenever we need it. But the ramifications for design, there's a interesting sort of positive side. You get to design, what is the user experience you design for the holistic user experience? But the challenge will be if you design that individual app and nobody is using the individual app anymore, well, what does that mean? What role does that app have? For example, if you're the Uber app, the Uber designers want to sell me some Vietnamese takeaway, and they want me to take a different car than the one that I was planning on booking, but that sort of disintermediated, it's sort of separated out. And going back to what I sort of was starting to hint at of being the future being closer than we think, these are three things that we have shown in the last sort of half an hour. There's Siri, which has the context, it's personalised to you. You know, the phone knows a huge amount and will know even more about you, your desires, your interests, things, your shopping habits. And then we combine that with the emotion of Pi, the personality, the friendliness, the psychologist, and then wearables. And you can see a glimpse of these coming together in the not too distant future to be your personal assistant in your pocket who's your friend and can do everything on your behalf.
So we were talking about how to close this session and what is the impact and what's the implication for us as designers, and what is the role of design when we start to talk about things being mediated by an AI kind of agent-driven world. We personally feel that it's a very positive future for design because all of these interfaces between systems and between interactions is where design comes to life. And this kind of future is something that we think is happening right now. So probably about 6 months ago, I was thinking that this kind of agent-driven world was probably a long way off, that the ability to get enough context around an individual, enough data in there to actually make your kind of personal preferences useful in an AI-driven world was going to take a long time for organizations to build up that knowledge base. What we saw with the Microsoft announcements just in the last month, the Worldwide Developer Conference from Apple, that future is very close now, and I think it's going to have a huge implication on the way we design, particularly for things that interface with our operating systems. So the Apple example was a really key one. So us being able to design those interfaces into how the AI understands our intent, understands what we're trying to do on behalf of brands or on behalf of services, and makes them real to end users in the simplest way is super important. And so just to wrap, we've presented a lot of different solutions, technologies, AI-powered tools in this presentation. We will put those out in a list. We had a number of that kind of didn't make the cut, so we have some on the cutting room floor as well. That would be really useful for those of you who aren't kind of drinking from this fire hose of AI change like we are every day. Please feel free to sign up to our newsletter. We will be publishing that list of all of the things we've talked about today and a bit of a summary, and you can read about it in your own time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.